Hello and welcome to this special edition of the debate here on France 24 in collaboration with the World Economic Forum in Davos. I'm Charles Pellegrin, and today we'll dig into a crucial question facing Europe. How can the bloc mobilize the financial resources necessary to achieve its ambitious, even existential goals? These goals are threefold. First, completing the transition to a decarbonized economy in the face of global warming. Secondly, achieving self-reliance and security in the face of Russia's expansionism on one hand and US isolationism on the other. And finally, boosting the European tech sector's competitiveness to better rival with the United States and China, among others. The cost of this has been outlined by Mario Draghi in his competitiveness report released in September of 2024. And that cost is 800 billion euros. That's about 5% of European GDP. So how can this be done? How can this be achieved? Our esteemed panelists will be able to help us figure that out. Let's introduce them. First off, we have Annette Mosmans. She's the group CEO of the Dutch pension fund group, APG Group. We also have Elisabeth Svantesson. She is the finance minister of Sweden, as well as Jörg Kukies, federal finance minister of Germany, and Nadia Calvino, the president of the European Investment Bank. Thank you so much for being with us. Let's start the conversation. I want to start with you, Nadia Calvino. The European Investment Bank's mandate is increasingly encouraging private investment in climate and energy. By de-risking these private capital in these areas, how does the EIB actually leverage its 550 billion euro balance sheet to do this? Mm-hmm.
Well, Europe has a very strong asset in the European Investment Bank, a very strong instrument, because we have indeed a close to 600 billion balance sheet. It is the largest public financial institution in the world. We have a very strong and balanced balance sheet with large, less risky investments, but increasingly also with high-risk investments in novel areas, in new technologies, trying to scale up startups in Europe also. And that provides us with a very good tool to leverage the guarantees from the European budget and to try to mobilize large-size investments in Europe. Just to give you an example, indeed, climate is top priority number one. We are the climate bank. And only last year, we mobilized 100 billion euros in investments in the area of energy. That is physical infrastructures, that is the deployment of renewables, energy efficiency, storage. We doubled investments in grids and interconnectors last year, and that's only going to go in the same direction going forward. So I think the European Investment Bank has indeed a key role to play, putting the money where Europe's mouth is, supporting Europe's priorities.
Jörg Kukies, how can financing and investment conditions be improved in order to boost private investment?
Well, I think the first thing where we've already made some progress but need to really move ahead ambitiously is to accelerate the planning and permissioning process in Europe. It just takes far too long from the investment decision to the construction phase, to the finalization phase, to the connection with the infrastructure. So I think this is something where we've been having a lot of debates. During the crisis, when we saw that we need to diversify our energy and rely more on our own homegrown sources of energy, we had a phase where we were more flexible in terms of accelerating the planning and permissioning process. That needs to now continue, and the new Commission has some good ideas. They now need to be implemented. Then I think we need exactly what Nadia said. We need interconnection. We still have 27 electricity markets, and the interconnection exists, but it can be broadened massively to gain efficiency. We are all in the same transformation in our energy markets. I don't think it would make sense in the new world of a stronger role of renewable energy to have 27 individual markets setting the incentives individually. It would be much better to think European in all of those things, because whatever we do there to improve things, to make return on capital quicker and more efficient, the more we attract this market to the private investors who are all very keen to invest, and the less we have to spend from public money. And this is the classic case of the energy market decarbonizing our production of electrons and molecules, where the private sector has a huge role to play, and we want it to play a huge role.
I want to bounce off of something that we discussed with Nadia, with you, Elizabeth Svantesson. Maybe as a reminder for the people watching, what makes those kinds of investments risky? Why do they need to be de-risked? What's so difficult about these specific kinds of investments?
Do you mean into the green transition, or?
Mm-hmm. For instance, yes.
Yeah, but I mean, can I just start a bit of, first of all, I mean, I get this question very often. How should we finance investment in green transition? How should we finance our defense? Because it's really going up. We have to build a strong defense. And how should we finance everything? And the easiest answer is, of course, growth. That's easy to say, but not as easy to do all the time, because we have Sweden and Europe we are behind US. And when it comes to risks, I mean, in Sweden at least, many companies, many investors see that like green investment is a future, of course. And so, I mean, I don't see that as a problem. There have been a lot of investment, I will say Northvolt maybe, and then so many have invested in that. But it's risk, a lot of risk, of course, but most investors see that this is the way and this is the road to go. I don't know if I understood your question, or did I answer it?
I think you answered it. You definitely did. I'll just move on to Annette Mostman. The Draghi report says in 2022 that level of pension assets in the EU was only 32% of GDP. In the US, it's 142% of GDP. In the UK, it's 100% of GDP. And a large share of EU pension assets flow to the US. How would you recommend we bring those assets back to the EU?
Well, I think I know this number. So if you look at our current situation, APG is managing 600 billion, and grossly 50% is in Europe and 50% all over the world, but also in US. I think our primary goal is to get a good pension for those participants, which is very important, especially in this longevity economy. But on the other side, so if you look at the market cap at US, a big proportion is going to Europe. So I think that's one point. The other point is that I'm very glad with the Draghi report. I think we're ready, and also the policymakers are ready to drive more investments into Europe. And what we need is a robust investing plan, whether you talk about green energy or AI. If we have those robust investment plans, we can drive more capital here. And with regards to the risk, if you are a pension asset manager, it's really the long term. So we look at risks, we look at the returns, of course, costs, but also the sustainability effects. And we really strongly believe that if you look at the longer term, it adds up. So it's a business model. It's not doing good. It's about having a future business model.
Maybe if I can come in on the issue of risks and your first question, how does the EIB leverage? You know, what's the value added? And there are three elements which explain why the European Investment Bank can really play an important role in unlocking private investment in these new areas in Europe. The first one is the technical capability. So we have very good engineers. We have a very strong expertise, for example, in the area of infrastructures, water infrastructures, energy infrastructures, clean technologies. And that gives a seal of confidence, so that once the European Investment Bank says, this is a good project, many investors join. Secondly, taking risks.
Yeah.
So we co-finance these investments, and we are a long-term, a patient capital investor, which means that when companies are going through dire straits, we can remain with them, investing in them, and follow them throughout the whole cycle, which obviously is extremely important where we're talking about these long-term investments. And then thirdly, I think that we are a pan-European investor. We are the only bank that is present each and everywhere in Europe. And so we are the only one that can provide for an investor or for a partner, you know, a broad perspective that they are investing in Europe. In that sense, we are a capital market union instrument already, you know, that we can scale up going forward.
Elizabeth, you want to add something?
One thing that has been very clear for me, we have talked about the capital market union for a year in the Eurogroup and in ECOFIN, and we have so much money stuck on Europeans' bank account, sleeping 11,000 billion euros. And that's a lot of money. And if we can have 10 or 20% of that working, it will give people, would make people richer, and we would have money for investments and innovations. And I think that's, in Sweden, 8 of 10 actually saves in funds and stocks. And both for the pension, but just saving. And that money make a lot of, it works, and it makes a lot of good companies. And I think we need more of that too. Because we have too little of the private investment, both when it comes to companies, but also when it comes to people.
Your cookies. What areas most warrant joint funding schemes on an EU level? How should these be financed?
Well, I think Nadia explained quite a few things, and the best example of pan-European financing is what the European Investment Bank is doing, because that's exactly, you know, issuing bonds to the public, supported by implicitly all 27 member states, and using that capital in a public interest bank-oriented way to finance investment either in public projects or joint projects between the public sector and the private sector, or private sector only, across Europe in all member states. I think that's a model case. The other big instrument that we have that will come up for discussion soon is the European budget, the MFF. And that's,
we're looking forward to
negotiating that. But I also think there we have to have a very serious discussion to much more future-orient the expenditures in the medium-term financial planning of the European Union, with all the funds that the EU is getting from the member states. So far, we are very focused, I would say, more on preservation of existing structures. If we future-oriented the European budget, we will be able to deploy hundreds of billions of euros over the course of the next 7 years, and I think that is strategically extremely important.
There's an interesting precedent to all this. It's the COVID crisis. It really showed that Europe could band together in a crisis, and basically the concept being when the house is on fire, you don't ask how much the water costs. Are we using the same frame of mind for these issues, which are also existential? Is there the same sense of emergency?
Well, I mean, comparing those two situations obviously doesn't work, because on the one we had a very urgent need, and we were all in the area of -3% to -8% in recessions. So I do think this is the issues are somewhat different, and we do have much more existing structures of financing to tackle the challenges that we have. And again, the big difference, I think, also between the Corona crisis and Next Generation EU, where Germany, Spain, and many other countries were very active in designing it and implementing it. We have the much stronger impetus to crowd in private capital, to crowd in pension money, because for example, all of the energy sector, the build out of renewable energy is a model where you have investments day one, and then you have a flow of cash coming back. So it lends itself to a cooperation between the public sector setting the rules and making sure the investment conditions are attractive, and then private investors making the deployment of the construction and the operation and everything. So I think it's hard to compare the two, because one was very clearly public investment needed to set an impulse to the economy. The other one is a much more investment-oriented case.
Mm-hmm. Elizabeth von Tessen, how can EU governments both prioritize all these investments on one hand and also keep public finances on a healthy trajectory on the other?
There is no easy way, but there are some ways. First of all, growth. Focusing on growth. When I get the question, how will you finance all what you need to do in Sweden? I always talk about growth and better productivity because that's an answer. When we talk about defense, for example, 2 or 3% of GDP, yeah, but 2% of 500 is more than 2% of 300. So we have to let the economy grow. And that Draghi report is all about that, of course, but not all reforms is expensive. Lower barriers to enter markets or red tape. We have a lot of red tape discussions in ECOFIN. So we can do a lot. And the second thing is that we have done in our government is to prioritize. Say no to some of your expenses and make them lower and see that we can invest now in infrastructure, in education, in the green transition, and so on. That's one of it's not too easy. So not too difficult, but it's very difficult. We will see that when we talk about MFF. Of course, that will be very difficult, but it's a lot of money, and instead of always making the EU budget bigger, think of, do we do everything here right? Can we prioritize in a different way? That's two good things to keep our eyes on and do.
Any opinions on that question from a private sector perspective?
But maybe first react to, I very much believe also in the growth. I think one aspect makes it a bit complicated, and the Draghi report is not telling about it, is the demographic shifts which we are encountering not only in Europe. So if we talk about growth, we also need to redefine that, because until now I think 70% of the GDP growth in Europe came from growing working population. Which will not be the case anymore. So growth, yes, but through productivity. So that's, I think, I'd like to add there. And for me, AI is a good mean to that end. But your question, that was another one.
I'm basically putting to you the same question about balancing public finances and this need for investment from your point of view.
Yeah, from my point of view, I think what I just told, driving capital from pension funds like we are into these kinds of investments which are needed for Europe is the easy path. The lines are short. What I also see is that there are a lot of savings in Europe on a bank account or in the houses, which are harder to get. So I think one of the things is, and also in terms of the longevity economy, we have a lot of white spots also in the Netherlands of people who don't have a good income for later. So I think it's very important to strengthen the pension income of people. To get more money into the pension funds. And then the question is, how do you get that? I think one aspect is the Dutch system, the Danish system. We have 2,000 billion of savings, pension savings. And the key element there is mandatory. It's a mandatory system. And that helps to get money into the pension system and to get money into the investments. The other one is the awareness of people, that they have to keep their savings for later and they live longer, which is good news, but they need it then. And financial education. So there are a few elements to strengthen. I strongly believe, of course, in the pension system. There are a few elements in other European countries which can help to drive some money from the saving accounts to this area.
Nadia Calvino, with a lot of these investment projects that we're talking about, it seems like they get stuck in an evaluation phase often of the time. The funds are available, but they get bogged down in the process. How can this change?
Well, I wanted to make two comments also to react to what colleagues have been saying. Well, let me reply to this immediately. Well, actually, the European Investment Bank is investing around, our plan is to invest 95 billion euros this year. So I would say we are replying to the needs in the sense of the projects that are coming to us that meet the requirements in terms of sustainability from a triple perspective: technical sustainability, financial sustainability, and environmental sustainability. So still, one of my top priorities since I became president last year is to reduce the time to market and become more efficient. And we're making very clear progress on that front. So, but I wanted to react to complement what we have been discussing. We've been talking about money, money, money. But the three reports that have been published on the future of Europe and competitiveness and security and defense, the Letta report, the Draghi report, and the Ministro report, have really, they have two recommendations that can be summarized in two words: integration, investment, in all these areas. So I think integration, having really large markets, removing the different regulations that exist from the security to the health sector, bankruptcy laws, state aid rules, all of these needs to be really seamless in Europe, so that investors, from pension funds to international investors or even retail investors in Europe, are actually investing in the whole of the EU. And that gives scale. That gives also scale to the deployment of the new technologies, the integration of artificial intelligence into our top-ranking industries in Europe. I think we should not lose sight of the power of integration in terms of leveraging the power of Europe.
Speaking of integration, the key element in this would be the capital markets union. But there was it was quite dynamic in terms of legislation. There's been a lot of momentum there, but it's still far, maybe 5-10 years from being truly completed. Is there any way of speeding that up?
Well, I mean, the Conseil de Ministres franco-allemand over a year ago made very far-reaching proposals and submitted them to the European Commission. Of course, now the Commission is new and is now thinking about this. We got a lot of support from many of the countries, all of them on this stage. Their governments supported our ideas in general. The European finance ministers made a decision to move this ahead very substantially. The heads of state and government made a decision to move this ahead very substantially. And now the way Europe works, the European Commission is in charge of making proposals based on the roadmap that ministers and leaders laid out. And I've already talked to the commissioners in charge, I think all of us have, and they know that we are expecting a very, very substantial proposal from the European Commission on simplifying things in the internal market, getting the internal market bigger, quicker, increasing the market for securitizations to get even more leverage in the banking system, harmonizing supervision to get a more uniform market, allowing our financial infrastructures to cooperate, merge, get a better critical mass quicker. So I think everything that we can do to get one harmonized internal market for the flow of capital is what we need to strive for. If you look at, as you said, the market capitalization in the United States is so much bigger than in Europe. We have to see that this is becoming a strategic disadvantage for Europe. For Germany, I can only say I envy the Netherlands and Sweden for their pension system, and many of the reforms that we started are going in the direction of creating a much stronger second pillar of our pension system with the corporate pension system and a third pillar with the private pension system. We didn't conclude this because the government broke apart quicker than we thought, but this is something also for Germany to on the agenda to incentivize pension investments, because pensions are ideal financiers of long-term sustainable investments. So I think this is also something we can learn a lot from Sweden and the Netherlands.
Annette Mosman?
Yeah, I was thinking, thank you for the comments. It's not about finding the money, it's unlocking the money. And I think it's about investing in integration, but it's also about speed. And when I think about the Capital Markets Union and all the governance steps which have to be taken, but I think really Europe should speed up. And I feel an immense sense of urgency. I feel it here in Davos with a lot of people. Whether you talk about deregulation, but we need to speed up. At the other part, the US is speeding up. So I think that's the third item which is required.
Elizabeth Svantesson, there's another aspect here, which is inflation easing, currently at 1.5% in Sweden, so below the 2% target. Lower rates are expected ahead. There'll be a sort of a likely path to normalize fiscal policy. What areas will benefit the most, will have the most impact from that freed up capital?
I'm very happy, first of all, that the inflation now is down to the targets. So we can, because we are in a recession, we can be more expansionary in the fiscal policy. And we have lower income taxes. And we have also now put quite a lot of money into infrastructure investments and also the green transition, of course, and education. So I feel confident, and we have, as many know, a very low debt. It's about a bit over 30%, but it shows that we can have growth and a low debt and investment at the same time. But now we are in a recession and want to, of course, short term, get the economy spinning and going with the budget, but also focusing and having my eyes on 10 and 15 and 25 years ahead. So we do right thing today for the economy to grow and Sweden be a better place, in the future. Can I say, I'm also very happy that I will say Trump now. I don't think we have mentioned it, and that's good, because we can take our destiny in our own hands. Yeah. This has been very much focused on Trump administration tariffs. Yeah, it's bad, but it's also bad that we have low productivity. So we can speed up. There is an urgency. I think it's an urgent. I see urgency among my colleagues, and it's much we can do as member states, but also more to do as a union.
Your cookies. Germany is the biggest economy in the European Union, and it has inscribed in it this debt break principle. Is this still adapted to the current challenges that the European Union faces?
Well, first of all, the fact that we have had a debt break for many years led to a creation of fiscal space, because in the years where there was strong economic growth, we retained fiscal stability and fiscal space. But the German debt break also allowed us, when the corona crisis happened and when Russia attacked Ukraine and we had inflation and energy problems, to unleash a very substantial fiscal expansion. So what's sometimes portrayed is we're always austerity and everything. The facts don't match that, right? I mean, when we needed to, we actually made so much fiscal expansion that Europe criticized us for doing too much. And skewing the markets and questioning the level playing field, which then, after we were very strong proponents of Next Generation EU, I think put that into perspective again. Yes, we are discussing, and I'm in favor of very targeted reforms to our debt break, but I think I completely agree that we have to be focused on growth potential. That is really the core, that we cannot expand our fiscal potential and then use it for consumptive purposes. It has to go towards increasing our growth potential. Germany has declined too much in potential growth. So our problems are not only cyclical, they are deeply structural. So we always have to accompany what we're doing in terms of creating more space for targeted investments in growth-enhancing public goods like bridges and kindergartens and schools and universities and rail infrastructure, with other reforms that are in the non-fiscal space that enhance growth, which also, by the way, will increase our possibilities under the European rules, which are also a rule base that guides all of Europe's fiscal policies.
I'd like to open up the floor to some questions from the audience here. So if anyone wants to ask a question to our panelists, please raise your hand and we'll get a microphone to you. and please introduce yourself.
Come on.
As we do.
It's a shy audience now.
In the green jacket in the front, the microphone is next to you.
Okay, Isabel Hartung, multi-board member. Thanks a lot for your insights. And I mean, the clarity and convergence of your view, which is great already and needed. My question is a bit towards, the efficiency of spending and how much it really triggers growth. Yeah, if I look into the areas you're investing, it's energy, it's defense, it's climate. Usually, the ROI, and especially kind of if you think, when the revenue is coming, it's no immediate revenue. So the question is it just spending and so the GDP goes up, so where comes the growth from? And the other question is, and you're rightly, Mr. Cookies, mentioning, I mean, with all these different states and different policies and it's like energy policy by every government, aren't you investing into things that might even contradict or, not just, go in an aligned way? And shouldn't you really, it's like work on this alignment, especially on the infrastructure side, before going into investments, which, still might go into different directions?
If I may come in on that, first to tell you that the European Investment Bank is a bank, and it's a very profitable bank. So every year we have profits exceeding 2 billion euros with these investments. So yes, we cannot lose sight of the fact that these investments in the long run need to be profitable, because that is what nourishes our reserves and allows us to continue to extend this investment portfolio without asking more capital from our shareholders, the member states. So it is that's why I started by saying Europe has a very strong asset, which is the European Investment Bank, because we have a large portfolio, 90% inside the EU, 10% outside the EU. We also represent Europe investing in the rest of the world to support our strategic interests and priorities. And then secondly, we are profitable and we self-finance. So that's, I think, a very important tool. And I'm quite sure that we will play a key role in leveraging the EU budget, because as we were discussing the European budget, the way we act is we have mandates, they provide us with guarantees, and we can leverage those guarantees through financial markets and through co-investment with the private sector. So that is really a tool that is, I think, going to play a very important role in mobilizing the necessary investments. But secondly, I would tell you that it's very important to prioritize. And this is something we're working with the Commission on. We're working on the simplification of the rules, reduction of red tapes, the recalibration of the green reporting standards, so that we really have make climate and competitiveness a winning tandem for Europe. And we're also working in trying to prioritize what are the key railway networks that we need to finance. What about the key energy interconnectors that we need to finance in Europe, so that we really focus our efforts and put our teams to work on those areas that can really make a difference for our competitiveness, productivity, and for our growth going forward.
And I think it's a very, very good question, because it's not only EIB. I mean, we have to think of that too. Many politicians say, we will invest now. This budget is an investing budget. We can have everything under that. My point is really, because growth comes, first of all, from productivity. So we have to know, of course, like for infrastructure, not all infrastructure is good. Maybe it can, as you say, it can boost short-term growth because, put a lot of money into it. But I mean, we have said no to some of the infrastructure because the investments, because they are not in the long term so productive. So that's a very good question that we all have to ask us in our, when we put the budget on the table. And finally, I know you don't win elections with this, but I think over the generations, we have a commission who work with like a productivity commission. That was one of the first things I did. I have experts working in the whole day, analyzing Swedish productivity. What's the problem? What can we do? What should we do as government? And I think that's good. So we have done some of that things already in the budget, but they are still working, and we will try to do everything in many areas to make our economy more productive.
Your Cookies, you wanted to add something?
Yeah, I just just because I think your question is very important, because I do think in Europe we have to be very clear what is the job of the public sector, what is the job of the private sector, and where do we need to work together. Best example for what is the job of the public sector: defense. Providing defense is the classic public good, and of course building the factories that build tanks, that's a private job, but buying and procuring and giving orders and defining a strategy, that is public good. Building and operating wind farms in this day and age is a purely private activity. The public sector has to provide the land, provide the regulation for the connection to the grid, but as we experienced when we're auctioning 8 gigawatts of offshore wind every year, the private sector is actually willing to pay us for the license to operate a wind farm for 20 years. So the construction, the operation, all of that should be done by the private sector. We're actually generating fiscal revenues that we then give to electricity consumers through wind farms. So no need for public investment in that. Grids are somewhere in the middle, I think, where the operation is private side and then the whole regulation is public side. But I think in all this debate around where our objectives, priorities have to be, it is very clear that we have to make this delineation of what is public, what is private, much more precise.
Do we have another question here, sir, in the front?
Thierry Deo from Meridian Infrastructure Fund. Thank you for the great discussion. You've mentioned redirecting in the next MFF discussion the budget into sort of future investment for the future rather than preserving. Do you think that the 800 million can actually really come all from private sector? Or do you think there's a need for expanding the resources during this MFF? I mean, there have been precedent of guarantee scheme in the financial instrument with InvestEU or Juncker Plan in the past. So there room for expanding that? And we never actually talk about EU borrowing capacity. So any thought about that?
Anyone want to venture a guess?
Did you say borrowing capacity? Many countries like to more common, will borrow together. We've done that when it comes to Ukraine. I think it's quite a bad idea, really. So prioritize in the budget, have growth, it's more important. We have, I mean, Europe has a lot of big debt. And many countries have borrowed a lot. And the way out of all this is not borrow more, I think. I mean, we might borrow, but it's not the first priority to borrow to try to get out of this problem that we're in with low growth. What do you say?
Well, I agree. I mean, that's why we gave ourselves fiscal rules in all of Europe that we all agreed on, where debt sustainability is really the biggest prerogative. Yeah. And I completely agree. It's simply wrong that we don't have European borrowing capacity. I mean, Nadia is the best counterexample, right? I mean, the EIB is a joint European bank with a 550 billion balance sheet, biggest in the world in terms of public promotional bank. So we do have capacity, and you named the example of the joint financing that we did to support Ukraine when it was necessary. So there's always these possibilities. What I don't think is a good idea now to go out and say we will issue Euro bonds to finance defense. First of all, we have to agree on what is the qualitative objective of the European pillar in NATO, define exactly the tasks that we need, define exactly what needs to be done, figure out what is the task of all of us to fulfill our requirements in terms of financing for the NATO targets, and then think about what is common European, as we're already doing in several European programs, and what kind of financing do we need for that. And then we figure out, what can Nadia do in terms of the expanded mandate for the EIB to finance defense, the programs like EDIP that we're already doing, and many others within the broad framework of the multi-annual financial framework. So we have to get more precise about how exactly we think about European financing capacity. To me, the discussion is always a bit too abstract, and always thinking about the financing first before we figure out what exactly is to be financed. I mean, you don't go to your bank and say, maybe I want to finance a house, but you don't know what kind of a house, how expensive it is, what specs it has, right? So I think we have to reverse the order there a little bit.
Annette,
let me add, I also think it's good not to borrow more from a public point of view, but to optimize the public-private cooperation and to have a good investment approach and plan. I think combining it and optimizing that, that's the way out.
We're running out of time, so in lieu of conclusion, I want to try something here. I'm going to play a little game. In a way, I'm going to ask a question. I want you guys to answer in just one sentence, just to kind of summarize your thinking on this topic. And the question is, what's the likelihood of seeing that 800 billion euros unlocked? And we'll start with Annette Mosman and go down the line one after the other.
I'm a very positive person. I think high as long as there are concrete plans underlying the 800 billion.
Elizabeth Svantesson?
I probably shouldn't argue about the 800 because that's, I mean, Draghi said 800 could be less or more. But I see an urgency, and I see that the likelihood it looks better now than a year ago, more of an urgency among all countries.
Your cookies?
Given that Germany alone will need to fund 729 billion is the latest estimate for the decarbonization of our energy sector, I think 800 is a conservative estimate for all of Europe. The vast majority of that
so you can take all. Yeah.
The vast majority of that, when we run the numbers in Germany, will come from the private sector, though.
Nadia Calviño?
I see strong momentum in Europe to undertake and master and succeed in the two I's, integration, investment. And I see a strong determination to master our destiny. So I would say very high.
I'd like to thank all the panelists, Annette Mosman, Group CEO of APG Group in the Netherlands, Elizabeth Svantesson, Finance Minister of Sweden, Jörg Kukies, Federal Finance Minister of Germany, and Nadia Calviño, President of the European Investment Bank. I'd also like to thank you for your questions, and those of you at home watching, thank you as well. Do stay tuned to France 24.